This is Tommy's Outdoors 89. And in this episode, our guest is yet another young scientist. Boy, I love talking to those folks. His name is Adam Francis Smith. And as you see in the title of the podcast, we're going to talk about camera trapping for large terrestrial mammals. We're going to talk about relation between predator and prey species. But that's not all. We're going to talk a whole host of other things, but among them, we're going to talk about Chernobyl radiation in Ecological Biosphere Reserve. I think that's the name, where Adam is conducting his research, or at least part of his research. And we're going to talk also about rewilding. And yes, rewilding is a subject on many episodes of my podcast recently. But then again, if you talk about large areas of land where you have predator and prey species and pretty much the full assemblage of animals that are in the modern ecosystems present, then there is no way to not talk about rewilding. And Adam, who doesn't have really, he's ecologist. He doesn't have his axe to grind particularly either way. He has some very interesting and valid points regarding rewilding and regarding human-animal conflict. So definitely it is worth to listen for all the reasons you can find. And folks, if you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, then please leave the rating or comments on the platform that you're using for this podcast. And if you're watching this on YouTube, then hit the like button. All those ratings, likes, stars, this is helping me and the podcast very much, and ensures that I'm going to produce more episodes like this and like other. And so with that, ladies and gentlemen, Adam Francis Smith and camera trapping and predator-prey species interaction and rewilding and all sorts of awesome stuff.
Adam, it's good to see you, man. It's good to see you, man. You've been traveling a lot, and the time is not not something that you traditionally think. Oh, I'm going to travel a lot.
No, definitely not. Hi, how are you? Yeah, I've been hopping all over Europe actually this year when everybody was locked down, kind of skirting between coronavirus rules and trying to get some projects that we were working on implemented. I mean, as a PhD student, you're always under pressure to collect data, and in a time like this, and when you have to travel, it was pretty important for us to try and get out and get some studies set up.
Did you have like a quarantine anywhere, or have like a special permits to cross the borders or anything?
Yeah, so not really. We only traveled when there was no quarantine restrictions in Ukraine and Belarus, where we were going to. Mm-hmm. I did have to do a pre-travel corona test to get into Belarus, and it had to be negative. But that was fine. I luckily have been negative at every test, and even now that I'm back in Kildare in Ireland, my blood tests came back that I never had corona at any stage. So
okay,
I think when you do all the right things and you try your best to stay safe, it's definitely possible.
Was there like a little bit of a disappointment? Like, I thought I had it and I never even noticed.
I am sure that at some stage I would have had to have caught it. Like we were just most recently I was in the Carpathians in Ukraine. And we were in Skolivsky Beskidy National Park, and we were in a 4x4, a Lada Niva with 6 fully grown men stuffed into this 4x4, a bunch of equipment, people sitting on each other's laps, and I'm sitting there going, this is Corona unfriendly for sure. But actually, we were all fine in the end. Yeah.
And like we get to we wind back in a second what you are doing, but like just before we started this recording, I said like you had a pretty crazy few months, and I remember one of the tweets that you said is like, oh, it's like 2 shots of vodka for lunch, and then we climb the mountain. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds awesome.
That was like a light day, I would say. 2 shots.
So listen, when we were chatting like a couple of months ago
Mm-hmm.
to set up this podcast, you said like, yeah, listen, I'm gonna be running camera traps in Chernobyl exclusion zone, right? And then my mind goes like,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
so. Please give us a little bit of background. What you're doing? What is the research? And
Mm-hmm. Sure. Okay. So effectively, yeah, I'm a PhD student with the University of Freiburg, which is in Germany, and I live in Germany. I live in actually the Bavarian Forest National Park,
Oh.
where my lab group is based. So my lab is run by Professor Marco Heurig. He is basically in charge of wildlife and visitor monitoring in Bavarian Forest National Park, but I am also employed by the Frankfurt Zoological Society, which is a conservation organization based obviously out of Frankfurt, and they have conservation projects and initiatives like all over the world, South America, Africa, most famously, but also in Europe. So also in Belarus, in Ukraine, in Kazakhstan, in Germany, and then also some involved in some projects in like Romania, Poland, Slovakia as well. So my project, I basically look at predator-prey interactions in mammal communities, but then focusing on Ukraine and Belarus and some specific project areas. So for me, I'm a researcher, I'm an ecologist, and I'm basically working within the framework of these conservation projects, which are trying to protect large wilderness areas or kind of wilder areas, such as Polesia, which is this large wetland area between Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and Poland, Europe's largest waterway system. And then we also have some project areas in the Ukrainian Carpathians, and then also in Białowieża Puszka on the Belarus side of the Białowieża forest complex. So for me, I'm basically involved in all of these project areas. And yeah, our main stuff is camera trapping. So we're trying to assess what animals are where, what their populations or abundance looks like, and then seeing these kind of interactions between them and the importance of these protected areas for large mammals.
Yeah. So what struck me is that it seems like the research is kind of concentrated on the eastern side of Europe.
Yeah.
Is there any particular reason? And obviously in my head is like, is it to do that the environment and wildlife is not that much destroyed in that region because there's less people and let's say historically it was less developed, let's say, than the Western country. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, so I think it's a bit of that. Like for the Frankfurt Zoological Society, they really focus their efforts on more pristine like places where they think this is a good area to protect because of the way the community looks in terms of the ecology and then the system in general. So yeah, it's for us like these places really stand out in terms of in a European context. Of course, there are amazing wild places or semi-wild places in Central Europe, in Western Europe, but generally they have already much better developed infrastructure for protection, much better infrastructure in, say, like a national park system, which is really like well funded and accountable.
Right.
But in Ukraine and Belarus, it's a little bit more like less so. Like they have, of course, they have amazing nature, but it's now at risk of exploitation. It's now at risk of being torn up and roads put in or large waterways put in where the wilderness is still actually in good condition. So that's why these projects are kind of been funded.
Yes, and are there in cooperation with like a local government?
Yes,
And like
always for the Frankfurt Zoological Society, it's always imperative to have local partners. So generally, like in Ukraine and Belarus, our go-to local partners are the local branches of BirdLife International.
Oh,
so for instance, in Ireland we have Birdwatch Ireland. In Belarus you have APB, and in Ukraine you have USPB, who are the local BirdLife partners, but also the on the ground people implementing these protection projects.
Right. And so you're running camera traps and you're focusing on interactions between predators and prey. So Can you just briefly describe like what is the idea? So essentially you want to figure out like, behaviors and patterns and how many predators. You're trying to get an idea how many predators I have in the area by counting number of times you
so in effect it's quite like that. So we kind of normally run like two different systems. The first is camera trapping in a kind of a random fashion where you can calculate a density of prey species. So in Polynesia, for example, the main prey species for wolves are elk or moose, red deer, and then there are some wild boar and also roe deer. For lynx, then it's mainly focused on roe deer. So the density of prey species is normally one of the most important components of the predator density. But then we have a second kind of camera trapping method where we focus cameras on roads and trails in order to capture predators which use these road and trail networks to move around. So we then focus the cameras on those trails. And then when we get the captures, we can see, we can calculate some kind of density estimation, especially for species like lynx, where you have individually recognizable animals because of the spotting pattern. So you can actually say, okay, that's lynx A and that's lynx B, and based on where you see them on the camera traps, you can estimate where their home range is. You can also generally see if they're male or female, so the density of something like lynx is definitely calculatable from these camera traps.
Is there like also kill site part of the research and kind of checking like how many kill sites you found?
Yeah, so it's opportunistic. Like we don't focus on walking through our study sites and trying to find kills, because it's much easier actually if you have an animal with a GPS collar to find kills. But
yes.
Yeah, we obviously write down everything opportunistically, even footprints and scats on the ground. They go into our kind of data collection, but it's not really our main focus. The main focus is more so on the cameras.
Right. And how do you? What's the process of picking the sites where you're gonna place the camera? Because I presume this is like there is some sort of a process. You mentioned this kind of randomly.
Yeah.
But I guess behind randomly there is something.
Yeah. Okay.
More...
So we have camera trapping protocols which were developed between the one of my colleagues in Bavarian Forest National Park, and also in collaboration with the Mammal Research Institute in Poland. And this is basically for seeing prey species on the camera trap. So you have your protected area or your study site divided up into kind of a grid. And we try to choose in every second grid square, we will put a camera trap there, but right in the center. So we don't have any say in the position of the camera trap. We just go with the GPS to that coordinate, and you say, okay, the nearest tree to this place with a steady view to the north that's where the camera trap
to
goes.
the north. So you at least
Yes.
said like, okay, they always pointing to the north.
They always point to the north. It also takes away the kind of bias from a researcher or a staff who are deploying the camera, because you don't want them to put it in a place where they think the animals will be seen. You want it to look randomly in the forest. But so we also choose north because the way the sun moves across the sky, you don't want the sun going in the lens.
I thought so. That this is smart to do from that perspective. And so you said like you're focusing on the prey species.
Yeah. So for this camera,
okay.
For this camera trapping method, we focus on the prey species. So there is on the second camera trapping method where we focus on predators, there is also a kind of there is a protocol to it. Generally, we use a grid of about 2.5 or 2.7 square or 2.5 kilometers each side, or 2.7 kilometers each side. And we
so
again
is it bigger or smaller than the one for
definitely bigger. It's normally bigger because obviously predators use more space. They have larger home ranges. So we need to cover more area with the same amount of cameras, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So within these grids, we again choose like every second one, but this time we choose where the camera location goes. So we choose in this grid cell, or in this square, let's pick a road or a trail where we think there's a high probability of seeing a lynx on the camera.
Oh. Why is that? So because it's so much harder to get those animals on the camera that you say, like, if I would go with totally random fashion, like with a prey species, I might never find anything. So
it's exactly that. So when we focus on camera trapping for lynx, we don't worry too much about the exact randomness of the cameras, because actually we can tell which individual is which based on the spots. But for something like red deer, it's much harder to say that's a different red deer to another one that you saw on a different camera.
Yeah.
So I will say that on the random cameras, you often get lynx and wolves and even bears on cameras that are placed randomly.
Yeah. So you focus on, like, in general predator prey interaction, or you specifically, lynx and wolves, or lynx and wolves and bear, and like.
So for me,
do you care about the species, or you like any?
No, I do care about the species. So for me, I focus on lynx and wolves. I have the camera trap data, of course, but I also work on some other aspects of the biology. I have luckily access to GPS data from wolves that had collars in Belarus. And I'm also using that data to kind of look at how wolves use the landscape, and all of these things kind of fit together. This is, I mean, the basis of a PhD thesis, I guess, or my PhD thesis, kind of putting these pieces together, and then in the end, looking at the system as a whole: lynx and wolves interacting, lynx and roe deer interacting, wolves and roe deer, wolves and red deer, all of these connections. Yeah.
Oh, it's super interesting. I remember reading paper from, I think, Scandinavia, somewhere. I don't remember, was it Finland or Norway, where sort of similar thing, where the paper was about like how population of wolves impacted population of lynx, and like, is there more wolves, there's less lynx, and if there's any inter-guild predation and stuff like that. So this is kind of, I presume, a similar type of thing that you're doing.
Yeah. So it all comes down to that in the end. It's about so looking at these study areas and then making kind of inferences about the mammal communities and the systems as a whole. And for me, I love this stuff because I get to see the continuum, if you know what I mean. I get to see in places like the Chernobyl radiation and ecological biosphere reserve, where you have so many different mammal species, large mammal species. And then you get to see somewhere like the Bialoveja forest complex or the Carpathians, where you have so many different mammals and more or less the complete community for modern system. And then I get to go where I live in Germany. I see nearly that same system, but a little bit different because there's no elk, there's no bears. And then I come home and I come back to Ireland and I see
sheep.
Yeah, red deer, sika, fallow deer, and that's it. But it's great because I get to talk to people. I get to discuss these things with people who who live and grew up in these systems, and then discuss with people in Germany who are just now having to who are having the realization that actually, wow, the wolf is really back, and it's back with in such a successful way, and how they feel, and I'm trying to be like a sponge. I'm really trying to take all of this information in from everybody. I'm trying to bounce my ideas off them. How do they see systems where there is no wolves, where there is no lynx? What does that look like to them? Is it strange? How do they think about it? Yeah. So.
Well, we're gonna open that can of worms in a second, but
Sure.
I'm talking about wolves, and but I have two questions. I have so many questions. So first of all, you mentioned modern systems. What does it mean? Does it mean like modern systems in terms of impacted by human development, or is it in terms of like, oh, it's not Pleistocene assemblage anymore, and we don't have mastodons? What do you mean by modern system?
Yeah, I suppose I mean a modern system in the sense that we realized, okay, this is all we have left, and this in these systems, this is like the complete assemblage of what we have left, or more or less so. I mean, even if you look at like Chernobyl, there's I don't think there's any jackals in Chernobyl, golden jackals yet. So they were probably there. I would imagine that's quite an easy place for them to get to, but they're not there now.
They're showing up in Poland anyway.
Yeah, they're showing up. There's also some in Germany as well. So
they're expanding.
Yeah,
that's interesting. Now a little bit technical question. I obviously followed you on Instagram and on Twitter, and everybody who listens to that podcast should just go and hit the follow. You posted photos of those camera traps, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at them as like, whoa, holy crap! This is like, obviously as a hunter, I'm running trail cams, and the trail cam is a little, nice small box that you can tuck in a tree, and it works. Like these camera traps was like a metal box, is like a big device. So I was like, oh, okay. So what is it like? What is the difference? Why they're so big, and why can't you just get a bunch of trail cams and put those trail cams on? And
so I mean, in effect, it's the same thing. The trail cameras that we're basically using Cutterback, which is an American brand of camera trap, with an interchangeable flash system. So you buy the camera itself, but you can buy extra flash modules. So I sound like an advertisement for Cutterback now, but they have white flash option. So white flash with a like a flash from your phone, or a general camera, where you get a really sharp color picture of an animal at nighttime. You have infrared, where you like, it's just like a normal kind of low glow camera trap or trail cam, and then you have black flash, which is sort of like an invisible infrared in a way, and the animals don't really see or detect anything. So that's really the main reason we use these cameras, is because we don't have to buy one camera with white flash and another camera with infrared. We buy one camera and two flashes. And I would say the other reason is that they have a really fast trigger time. I think it's about a quarter of a second. So it's in general, it's quite fast.
Yeah. When I saw that, I was imagining that it had to have like a technical advantages over like a regular trail cam.
No, I mean, there are some other aspects that we use. We use like a time lapse feature to know how long the camera trap is operating. We use multiple picture triggers to make sure that we get that we actually see what the camera was triggered by, and Yeah, that's more or less it. I mean, you other people are running great camera trap studies with other cameras. It's completely doable. We just so happen to pick this one.
Yeah, no, I'm just homing on the fact that these are like, professional photo traps, camera traps, rather than trail cam, which is more of a consumer.
Yeah. So it's not one you just buy on
50,
Amazon.
$50 and you stick it on the tree. How they're powered? So is it like like how they're powered and how long the battery lasts? How often you have to go in and replace the batteries?
They like our ones are powered by we try and buy like industrial standard batteries. So if it's the new Cutterbacks, they use a D cell, which is the big chunky battery, and normally they take 4 D cells, and it kind of lasts. It's hard to know. This is always the question for camera trapping. They last longer if there's less animals triggering them. They last longer if they have less time-lapse pictures to do. They last longer in generally warm or not too cold weather. The cold weather tends to wear the battery down faster. So all of these things kind of play into it. We try and get the camera. We try not to leave it for more than 3 months.
Wow. Wow, so it's quite a lot. And do you have like an option to use the solar panels to recharge them, or is it because if it's in the forest, it doesn't really work?
Yeah, so we tend not to do it because it's more expensive. It's not always reliable, and it makes the camera quite conspicuous. Like you can see the camera, and we generally don't want people to see the cameras if they're going into any of these protected areas for mushroom picking, berry picking, poaching or such.
Yeah. Oh, that's a typical thing. I know that there's a technique that you're putting one trail cam and then you're putting another trail cam looking at the trail cam. So if someone has stolen your trail cam, who's done it.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we have discussed at length, and we also have some cameras with stickers informing people of the danger of taking our camera trap, because for FZS it's not really important to lose 1 or 2 camera traps, but the local NGOs do not like this kind of stuff going on, and they are more than happy to go to the local community and say this is not okay, like we need to sort this out together. So
but in the sense they don't like the traps that you guys running a trap?
No, they don't like people taking the traps.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're also involved. They're involved in coming out with us, and sometimes they're doing it by themselves and all of these things. So they have investment and ownership of these cameras as well. It's like I'm effectively a data processor at the end of the day. It's their community, and it's their wildlife at the end of the day, and they're more invested in it in that sense than I would be, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good one. You mentioned Chernobyl exclusion zone. I have so many questions. Like, so on one end, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that on one end is like this area that was no people for a long time, and then nature took over, and you see the plant life and animals kind of going back into area where it was like a city and people living there, and the roads that are now overgrown and stuff like that. On the other hand, it seems to me like this is becoming like a tourist attraction almost. Like, let's go to Chernobyl. I have a buddy who's a very passionate motorcycle rider, biker, or however you call him. And he is like on to me for like years at this point, like, hey, let's go to Chernobyl. It's cool, and it's this thing. So what is the reality on the ground when you get there? And before you answer that question, like, I presume that in terms of radiation and all that thing already settled, and that's no issue at the moment.
Yeah, first and foremost, there's not really an issue with radiation anymore. Generally, if you're working in the Chernobyl reserve or such, you generally spend, I think, 4 days a week there and 3 days a week away. This is just, I think, because of the health and safety, they just don't want people any more exposed than they have to be. But I mean, I spent a few weeks there, and for me, I'm guaranteed that I got more radiation from the airplane flying there and flying back than I did from actually being there.
So is the radiation level actually still elevated compared to other areas?
It is still elevated, and in certain places it is more elevated, but in general it's a lot lower than it was. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
I mean, there's still places in Central and Western Europe that have comparable levels of radiation now, just because of how much radiation was blown by the wind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but so yeah, it's a strange place. It's both exciting, sad. It's beautiful, and it's I think the tourism thing is becoming a big factor for the Chernobyl exclusion zone. It's quite easy to get there from Kiev. It's only a few hours in the car. The one thing I will say is that the tourists basically follow the same one road in. You would go to Chernobyl town, and then you would go to Pripyat and see the abandoned city. And on the way, you can see the reactor and the sarcophagus, and then you leave. So there's not really there's not so much an impact on the wildlife. I think much more so illegal kind of tourism, people kind of crossing into the reserve by themselves and setting up, going camping and doing like an illegal excursion, if you want.
So that's illegal. You cannot just go to Chernobyl and just with a tent and whatever.
No, you need, even for us to go as researchers, like we needed, like to have loads of documents and scans and permits and passports and stuff. And in general, the tourism is it seems highly regulated, but it's more and more popular. Yeah, but I would say in terms of the wildlife impact, it's pretty minimal.
Oh, okay, that's good to hear.
Like the reserve itself is 2,500 square kilometers or something around that. I can't remember the exact number, but the people do not go to the vast majority of that.
Mm-hmm. What is it like in terms of wildlife, and did you notice any major differences than anywhere else in Europe because of a kind of lower interaction with people?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's still hard to see things. It's not like going on safari. You like we spent a lot of time walking in the forest, a lot of time walking across the old abandoned croplands, and I mean, I saw a handful of deer, some Przewalski horses, and tracks. That's really it. But tracks from everything, tracks from wolves, tracks from elk, pretty much everywhere.
Yeah. And is it because there's comparing to, pre-human industrial development, is it still so much less animals in terms of ton per square kilometer, or is it just like we humans are just out there and these animals are not necessarily wanting to show themselves, especially predators, and that's why?
So we actually kind of we were stuck for picking a study area this year because we had Corona on one side and trying to organize it on the other side, and we picked the Chernobyl reserve in Ukraine because we had good access, and because of the situation there, we would expect this area to be kind of like a theoretical carrying capacity for mammal biomass in the region.
Okay.
So in effect, we can use the Chernobyl reserve as a comparison between other reserves in Polesia and maybe even further than that. But it's clear from other studies that have been done, and probably no one has done as much systematic work as we have, but we haven't really processed it properly yet, so I can't say that for certain. But other studies have shown that there is a really high abundance of mammals there. And I think, yes, for wolves, it seems a very, very good place, because the pressure on wolves in Ukraine and Belarus is people. In both countries, they can be shot as pest species.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's interesting. So what's the idea is you're going to compare that whatever is in you found like in Ukraine with the other at this point, is there, I know that you have a lot of notes there, like is there at this point anything that is worth mentioning that we kind of like that I'm successfully avoiding
No,
with my questions?
not really. It was just in case I couldn't remember it. Like, for instance, this is always the thing for me, the size of protected areas, I can never remember. So I have, for Chernobyl, I've written about 2,500 square kilometers. No, there's nothing like that. But in general, we're very lucky to have, to been able to get access to it, and have such great staff on the ground who are really supportive of the project. And, you know, I wish I had some results to even talk about, but in general, I've known from just kind of very quickly flicking through some camera trap pictures already that there's plenty of stuff there, and there's plenty of big elk and stuff, and that's
how
exciting.
many of these photos you have to go through, because I presume it's like thousands and thousands of photos, and you need to like analyze every single one of them.
Yeah. So
or are you like running some image recognition software to help you with that? How does that work?
So I would say that the image recognition software is coming, and it's coming fast, and some people are already doing it, but you need to train a lot of these algorithms with kind of pre-existing tagged images. And for our studies, I think we kind of keep the study period short enough that we can do it as people without too much problems. It will be thousands and thousands of pictures, but there's always people who are, you know, interns or local staff who really want to be involved with this as well. So it's quite easy to partition a few camera traps to one person and let them tag.
So it's not a problem. Listen, another question that surely a lot of people who listen to that have this question is, especially in Chernobyl, and we all saw these videos on YouTube or whatnot about, you know, like mutant catfish or this or that. Like, do you see any impact on wildlife from the radiation, any abnormalities or anything like that?
No. So in general, no. Like there was again plenty of studies on this kind of stuff, and I'm not really a radio ecology expert. It's not really that interesting for me. I mean, it's interesting in the Chernobyl sphere of things in general, but I would say no, because certainly at the moment the levels of radiation are relatively low, and as well as that, wild animals don't live for a very long time, not enough time to develop mutations at a significant rate to show something that would be kind of recognizable as a deformity or something like this. I mean, nature is kind of cruel. If there is a deformity in a wild animal, it generally is eliminated just through selection in general. So it's kind of expected to not see anything.
You're right. And then if wolf lives to 3, that's a big deal, right?
So
exactly, given the number of years it passed, and probably if there were even any mutation or whatever, they're already gone, and
exactly. So
is healthy.
So there's probably a higher rate of mutation, but is it significant to alter evolutionary trajectory of the animals? It's hard to say.
Oh no, I didn't even mean that. I just thought like, but you're right. It's like many years already past that. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about wolves, especially and other predators that are moving. They're really moving from the Eastern Europe towards the West. I am wondering, about your comments, like general comments about this, and what you see in your research?
Yeah, I mean, like in general, it seems like this positive trend is, really driven by like this strict protection of these animals, but also maybe a change in how we as humans use the landscape. Probably in the last 100 years or 50 years, there's been a little bit of a change from, extensive agriculture and large rural communities with quite a low tolerance for large predators to, I think more than 60% of people in Europe live in urban areas now.
Mm-hmm.
And even like in Ireland, we have the highest percentage of people living in the capital city compared to the rest of the country than anywhere else in Europe.
Yes.
I think all of these things kind of facilitate the comeback of these large predators, and I think wolves are kind of, wolves are the mold breakers in a way. They can move such long distances. They're not very picky with habitat. As long as they can eat something and they can move, then they can go and establish in places as far west as the Netherlands and Belgium without really any problems.
Mm-hmm.
And the network of Natura 2000 areas or national parks and protected areas in between sort of serve as these like jump pads that these animals can use, like corridors. And wolves are really adaptable. They can do this kind of without our help, and there isn't really any wolf reintroduction projects needed in
Mm-hmm.
the European mainland. But for lynx, it's quite a bit different because they're so specialist in terms of habitat, and they're very shy and they don't really disperse in the same ways. There are normally, I think, I might be wrong on this, but I think there are generally some animals that just disperse a really long distance, and they're kind of like saviors or founders of this kind of genetic diversity that the lynx need. But like in Germany, there's multiple lynx reintroduction projects that were successful in where I live in the Bavarian Forest in I think the 70s or the 80s. And then also on the Czech side of the border in like the Šumava National Park in the Czech Republic, there was a reintroduction a few years later, and now this is like one of the most well established lynx populations in Europe. So yeah, it's facilitated by multiple things, by the protection, by how we use the land, but probably also by people's attitudes. I don't think people are as worried about these species as they were before. And I think there's kind of, there's a little bit more understanding and respect for them in general.
Yeah, but is it like that related very closely to this shift? Because in essence, you're talking about shift from the rural communities and rural areas into the cities or town, and like that, like to me is related, because if you live in a countryside and running sheep,
yeah,
your attitude toward wolf is substantially different than when you're living in the city. And you're traveling by tube or whatever. It's like, oh, wolves, they're good ghosts of forests and all this crap. Well, not crap, but like kind of Disney-fied vision of wolves, where if they have an impact on it, so that's probably related, right?
Yeah. So but it is understandable if you're running sheep or you're a shepherd of a sheep flock. Like this is difficult stuff for you. This is like really putting you under pressure, and it's scary. I understand that. I understand that. Like if someone is saying, "Oh, well, this thing it's going to impact your livelihood," but it's like not my fault. It's just the way it is. Like that's scary, and it kind of leaves pastoralists and livestock producers kind of out in the dark a little bit. But at the same time, like we as a society have to decide at some point, or at least bring everyone along to realize that we can't really let the course of ecology or the course of evolution be dictated because, well, we just don't like them, and they put rural communities under pressure sometimes, because these things are also part of rural communities, and our understanding and our kind of evolution as people is alongside these animals. And so when you start removing those things, it's also impacting the cultural heritage in a way. Like, we have to remember that our ancestors grew up with wolves and lynx, and probably they had low tolerance or such for them, but it was just a part of life. And already you see, and in places where wolves have always been, there's quite a high tolerance in general. Like, it puts livestock herders under pressure. That's completely fine, and that's understandable. But they kind of know how to deal with it, or they just take it as a fact. It's like, well, it's raining today, that puts us under pressure. It's just part of nature, and it's strange that we have now control over that in a way, or we kind of enacted control over wolves. We decided, or somehow society chose to sort of eliminate them or extirpate them quite a lot from their range. But for instance, we can't do that with the weather. We can't change the weather. Mm-hmm. It's just part of nature. So we have to kind of come to this compromise, or come to this path together where we can have both, where we realize this is part of nature, but let's not persecute the wolf for being natural. Let's protect ourselves from nature, or our livelihoods from nature.
Yeah.
So in a way, you build a shed for cattle to protect them from the rain. There's also these kind of implementations that we can make to better protect, say, livestock herders from wolves.
Yeah, it's a hard thing, and I agree with what you're saying, but on the same time, if our ancestors, the first farmers and people who just starting, right, had a physical and technological capacity to eliminate a wolf, they would do it. I'm guessing so. And in itself, this is not a unnatural process.
No,
right? It's like almost like an intra-guild relation, predation, right? That wolf will kill fox, except the numbers game is like they cannot kill every single one of them, and it just turned out that we are, through the technological advance, we now have this capability. So there we done that, and it's always, for me, I spend a lot of time thinking about it. It's sometimes hard to reconcile, treating us like humans as a part of nature, right? Like we're part of nature, but then it's like, okay, but if we're part of nature and this is all natural, and so what's going to happen? We're going to wipe out everything because it's natural, right? If you have, right? If wolves have a super, and I don't have an example right now, but it's known from the history that when one predator becomes a super predator and kills all its prey, and then the population goes down. Like, right? We don't want this happen to us, right? Like,
of course.
So this is this line, like, where we are part of nature, but then we we are so powerful that we actually control the nature. So can you be part of something that you control? With the like it's.
Yeah, this is hard questions. I have no idea. Really, it's for me, I can't reconcile them either. Like, how do you answer these questions? And these are things that at least we have to talk about. The problem is that we've had even hundreds or thousands of years of nobody talking about this. Like, how do we? What is our impact, and how do we measure it? And can we mitigate it, or should we mitigate it, or and how do we make decisions that how do we make decisions that impact a whole landscape or a whole ecosystem, and then by effect or through the ripple, the whole planet? Like, we now, the difference between our relationship and with nature and our ancestors' relationship with nature is we, in a way, understand nature a lot more. We can really measure everything down to molecules, and that's in one sense scary, because it takes us away from the physical act of being in nature and the physical act of interacting with nature. But at the same time, it gives us a fundamental understanding that our physical interaction with nature and our face-to-face interactions have an impact. So it's hard to know what the correct thing to do is, or how we should act as a society, as even as scientists. It's extremely hard to know that.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said, that on one end we understand nature more. At least some group of people who are studying and like you said can split hairs and take out DNA of this and that and something else. But then on the other hand, you have all the population who is just busy, Facebook,
they're living their lives,
or whatever else, and you can argue that they're much less connected to nature than people who used to, they had no idea about the DNA, but they were just living there. It's like, okay, I see the weather pattern, I see this, I see that, right? So
so it's a completely different understanding of nature. Like everyone that, if I meet someone new and I say, this is what I do, the first thing they say to me is, oh, like David Attenborough, like I love David Attenborough and I watch all the documentaries. So they have some information. It's not that they have no information. It's just different. And there is the people who, boots on the ground, or even scientists who have a very acute understanding of these things. And yeah, of course, it's just really hard to reconcile. Where do we go from here? How do we change our attitudes? How do we keep people like in nature interacting and enjoying it, but at the same time preserve it and give it the space it needs, give it the space it deserves, and allow the processes which shaped not only nature but shaped ourselves and society and everything that we've built as human beings is on this foundation of nature. And it's a bit like I don't know, it's like sitting on a branch and using the hatchet on the side that the tree is on. You're just going to fall off.
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
There's only so much that we can replicate or manufacture ourselves to replace these processes, and at what cost? Like it would. The cost, like maybe you've seen it before, like if we took away all the pollinators and had to pollinate everything by hand or by machine, it would just not be worth it. And it's hard to it's hard to then say, well, then we should protect these wild spaces and wild creatures. But then in the short term, there's normally a monetary gain that goes the opposite way.
Yeah, it's look. This is not a question, but it's kind of like I'm going to throw it out. I'm wondering, like, what's your comment? I know this is not a question, so I'm not expecting answer. But on one hand, I am wondering, like, this is quite common, and especially in a group of people who are like you, like researchers or outdoors people like myself. We need nature. And then it comes to the thought, like, do we really? And this is, I think, a problem, right? Do we really need the nature in those wild places, right? Because let's say, okay, we have this landscape, heavily modified by grazing, right? And this is like a whole discussion, like, oh, is it overgrazed or is it not overgrazed, right? Oh, if you want to have a wilderness and bear and wolf and lynx, it's overgrazed. But if you want to have this, community that lives there for hundreds and hundreds of years, oh, well, that's not overgrazed because that's what they do, right? And we have people living in a space station, right? Yeah. We're talking about going to moon and going to Mars, like, so at some point it's like, do we really need that? And then it's like, okay, is it like we just want it? And often you have this discussion like, why the rewilders, right? Using this umbrella thing, why the rewilders not just admit that the wolves are cool and they want them? Like, and I'm a first one, like, yeah, wolves are cool and I want them. I'm not, I'm struggling to find an argument that we really need wolves, because if we don't have wolves, then everything will collapse. Like, no, I think we'll get to go without wolves, right? So I'm wondering, like, how much do we need, right? Because then I agree with you. Then we're going down through the chain, and
it's a slippery slope.
You guys say, oh, you don't need the wolves, and then we don't need this, and like, we don't need the pollinators. Like, oh, hang on a minute, no, actually, we do need pollinators, and like, oh, but if we want to have pollinators, we also need like. So is it a matter of like everything in nature to finding that balance? Or you think that we have a responsibility to say, like, well, we need to bring all this thing back because it used to be there, so it has to be now?
Yeah, so I think it's a bit of both, because it's not like saying we should bring back wolves to Ireland and put them in everybody's garden so everyone has access to wolves. Like, this is they don't need that interaction. It's what is more so is for me is that all of the services that we take from nature or it provides to us, which we have built our societies on. These things are, it's scary that these things could be eroded away. And I use the word erosion like specifically. It's literally like the slippery slope, chipping away piece by piece until you realize, okay, well, we've lost 68% of mammal, bird, amphibian biomass in 50 years. And that happened just in 50 years. Like, that's, and we didn't even see it happen. That's what I mean. It's like really like an erosion that you don't really see. It just, you kind of blink and it's gone. And I suppose when you talk about wolves, it's more of it's really almost like a statement. It's really like saying, we cannot let this erosion happen. Therefore, we will make it's like a statement of saying, the hardest thing to coexist with, which I even don't think it is the hardest thing to coexist with. I think coexisting with other people is way harder.
Yeah, but, and with viruses, it's also
exactly.
harder.
So coexisting with nature, if we can coexist with like large carnivores, it's kind of like the epitome or the zenith of nature coexistence. And if we can do that and we can protect them and we can protect the areas that we need in a natural state, then all of the services that we rely upon nature to provide are protected as well. It's like an umbrella. So it's for me, it's like sort of important in that sense. So I would say, in terms of like absolutism, is it absolutely important or is it absolutely vital? Probably not, but it is too valuable to ignore in terms of changing people's attitudes. Because if we do not change people's attitudes and we continue down the same road we're going, it's going to be a bleak future for us, and it's going to be a bleak future for I don't know, like our kids and the next generations are going to, I really think they're going to look back and say they absolutely shortchanged us with how they treated the world and how they treated nature and how they valued it, because now they would have so little, and already in a way we have so little, we just don't know it. But the more we look at it, the more we study it, the more that we communicate this, it's clear to see that we are already shortchanged, and everything we do is important in that sense.
Yeah, it is kind of not funny. That's not the word I'm using. That it seems like people who have but maybe it's natural. The people who have a less access to nature, like urban communities,
Mm-hmm.
seems to be more tolerant and more kind of oh, let's bring back wolves and bring then the communities who are, then the rural communities. That's what I was gonna say, but I think that's not fair either, because there's a lot of farmers and a lot of people in the rural communities who are absolutely championing biodiversity.
I really think that's true as well. I think that those people will actually come out as really like heroes, like leaders in shaping the conversation and shaping like the next generation of how like landscape looks, how our landscapes look in the future. Those people will be pivotal, and I mean there is still space for people to farm in ways that are more like intensive or economically not economically valuable, but more profitable. There is still space for that. I'm not saying that all of those farms need to disappear. I would never say something like that. Or that farmers in general shouldn't be like farming the landscape. Of course, this is the thing, but we can have all of it. That's actually like the bottom line, is we can have all of it, and it can coexist together. So it's not exclusivism. It's not saying that wolves are in a way of removing farmers from the landscape. If you ask me, actually, farmers are already leaving the landscape, and it's not because of wolves, and it's not because of rewilders, as much as they are sort of saying, well, here's it's not a vacuum, but it's like an unfortunate circumstance that people are leaving the land. What can we do at least to get the most value for ourselves, for our descendants in 100 years' time? What is more valuable to them?
Yeah.
So people are taking advantage of that, and I always get sad when I see that people think like rewilding is an attack on rural communities. It's kind of just really like unfortunate. I think the thing that rural communities could really do is better support, and none of the, or very few of the agricultural schemes or processes that I see are really supporting rural communities. This kind of business as usual model is not helping. I don't see it helping. It's people are moving out of rural communities. Yeah. So of course it's not helping to enhance them.
Well, listen, let's go right there. You mentioned the R word, right?
Yeah.
And this is what I recently spent a lot of time talking on a podcast and otherwise. So maybe the first question: do you think that we need like a different framework to talk about it? Because it seems like when you mention the word rewilding, there's a lot of people who are just straight away going into the full attack mode.
Yeah,
and like you mentioned, you run people on the land, this, that, and something else. It is unfortunate, because that's this confrontational relation rather than cooperative. Do you think that we probably need, like, because the term rewilding kind of, as far as I'm concerned, it springs up to like existence, I think in the 90s. And since then it was adopted by a lot of people. We're talking about rewilding, and it's almost like all that good stuff and all that we talk about, reintroductions and large carnivores expanding their range. The moment you mention rewilding, like everything just like a spanner in the works. Like, okay, it's over. Like, because, do you think like we almost needed like a different term, different framework?
Yeah, I mean, it tends to get like that, and it's just a bit like, for me as a scientist, rewilding is not the most scientific term in the world. Like there has been plenty of debate within the ecological community about rewilding as a term. Is it even novel? Is it just not restoration ecology, which has always been going on? Like, what role does it play in conservation in general? So for me, I don't really care about what you call it in this sense. Rewilding, if it's too emotive, then probably just use something else. It doesn't really matter. It's actually more that we change people's attitudes and we change our actions. because, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. If you look in general, conservation has failed in a way. Like, we have lost so much stuff and eroded the natural world, and our own experience of it and our own understanding of it has been kind of eroded away. If you look at any of these reports, like the WWF Living Planet report or the State of Nature in Europe from the European Commission, it's generally not good news. And the only thing, or the best thing about rewilding, is that has kind of thrown a stone into this stagnant pond of water, and this ripple effect has really changed things a lot. It's really come about in itself as a tool of changing people's attitudes. And it does use emotion. It really latches onto that, because when you talk to people about nature and you talk to people about how much we all love nature, like this is like a fundamental human thing. No one says I hate nature. No one says that. But so when you talk to people about nature and you talk about how much you love it, and do you want more experience like this, or do you think it deserves this place? Like, everyone says yes, but it's just about these kind of nuts and bolts like spanner in the works. Like you said, there's certain places where it comes into a problem with coexisting with some rural communities and with some species, whether that's trees or whether it's wolves. All of these things have their place in sort of the in the debate and the conversation, and it becomes a problem when you don't bring along the communities that are kind of at the coalface, but the communities that are really face to face with this every day. So I think rewilding in general is doing much more good than harm. But you always need to be careful. I mean, with conservation in general, it's always been it's not about managing wildlife, it's about managing people. Yeah. It's about managing people where they are and how they behave and what their opinion is, and when faced with a challenge, what do they do? Like, do they say, okay, like a lion has taken 2 of my goats, I'm going to kill the lion? Or do they say, a lion has taken 2 of my goats, I'm going to join with my colleagues, and we're going to bring the goats together, and we're going to build a pen, or all of these things. Like, that's just a very random example, but like, it's just about changing the game, because really, if we don't change anything, we're screwed anyway. So for me, it's good at taking this like big leap forward, and it's maybe a little bit rough and a little bit coarse and a little bit insensitive sometimes, but they're more. It's more about streamlining it from here on in. Like, I really think that's the case. I think you see some people who were so against rewilding now coming together with rewilders and finding the common ground. And when you find that common ground, it is what that is. It is common ground for both sides. Because, like, I'll use Scotland as an example, where you will still have driven grouse moors, and then you will have kind of more wild land shooting opportunities, and then you will have wild protected forests, and you can have all three. Like, this is not a problem, and you can coexist. Everyone can coexist in this space. It's just about, where does this boundary lie? Like, are you going to take all of my stuff away from me, or are you going to, or are you going to just rewild a tiny piece of land and we can ignore you
and have none of it? Yeah. That's like a couple of points on this. I was listening to a podcast some time ago with the people who are involved in mountain lion or puma conservation somewhere in South America.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy said, like, conservation is managing conflict. That's what it is. Like I'm a conflict manager. That's it. So that's kind of like in line with what you said, is managing people. It's managing conflict.
Yeah. So, but I'm even at this stage. I'm already past the point of using the term conflict. Conflict is a again. It's like a human construct. It's just coexisting. It's just finding.
True.
The middle
conflict
ground.
Is a way of coexisting. Yeah, that's true.
Conflict is a part of coexistence, I would say, because there's also the other aspects. There's also the joy of having puma in your local area and the pride and stuff that comes with that. Like you see that in places in Europe, but you also see it in places like in Central America. One of my colleagues and good friends, her camera trapping project discovered the first puma in her country, and they are so proud of this discovery. Like it's a source of pride, but it's also it's going to be a coexistence problem. Like they know that this is going to be a coexistence problem, but it's together with the pride. It's moving these pieces forward and finding common ground.
Yeah, and the other point that you made, I thought was excellent. That that actually rewilding was like a stone that you throw into the stagnant water, and I love that analogy. I never thought about it, and it truly put this in a different context, in a different light for me. So thanks for that, because I of the opinion that sometimes you need to piss people off to get them thinking. Mm-hmm. And maybe this is exactly this. Like you get people pissed off at something, but that, after a second thought, it'll get them thinking about it and get more people thinking about it. So that was an excellent point.
Exactly, and by sort of accidental effect, the people who are very against rewilding have really amplified it. Like now it's a thing that you read about in the newspaper because some people have a problem with it. But also there's like there is this real initial lack of understanding, and it's both a lack of understanding of what people who are engaging in rewilding, what their goals are, because it's always different. It's always some mixture of different things. So it's initially confusing in that sense, but then there's also the initial confusion about ecology in general and how systems work and what nature is trying to do or does by itself without our help. And in effect, people who like to manage land don't like the term rewilding, but rewilding is just another type of management. It's
man, thank you. I just so love that you said, because this is something I'm there is a pushback from the rewilders when I say exactly that. I mean, like, rewilding is a management. You need to actively manage, and you need to decide that you're going to rewild. And, what you mean? I'm not sure. So I love that now you're a scientist and you're kind of saying the same thing. It's another form of land management.
Yeah, like, but in effect, I wouldn't really even call myself a rewilder. I'm just an ecologist. It just so happens that I get involved in these conversations because they're really interesting. They're really good fun. But of course. To not do something is a decision. So it's and in general, it always has some kind of management aspect to it. I don't think I don't think rewilders should be worried about saying that we will manage red deer numbers in order to rewild. Like, that's not a problem. That's understandable, like, completely, and it has a scientific basis. So why you wouldn't rely on the science as like your crutch, I don't know, but. This is the problem. It's the problem with every side of the argument. The more, if you start saying fundamental things and you don't change because of some fundamental reason or some fundamental belief that's not really based on enough like evidence or scientific fact to move your argument forward, you just go around in circles.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, you made a couple of excellent points. Like even that the people who are against rewilding, they kindly amplify that. Is it like this is just like a sign of the times today, right?
Yeah,
if you want to ban something and remove something from YouTube or whatever, you guarantee that this thing will go viral because you wanted to hide it. So this is kind of like that thing. Listen, as you do your research and you look at that current state of nature, do you feel like sad that for what we lost? Is that something that you wish you didn't know that? It's like example I've gave a couple of times that the moment you go to the hills, and I'm only in Ireland for the last 13 years. So the first time I went to the hills, it's like, oh, it's so beautiful and this landscape and all that, right? And then the next thing, well, maybe not next thing, but a couple of years later, I met Porrick Fogarty, and he's like, oh, it's overgrazed, it's a wet desert. It's like you ruined that for me, right? It was so beautiful, and now you ruined that. Is there like a part of like sometimes when you kind of confronted with what we have versus what we used to have or what we could have, that you go like, oh, this is so depressing?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't remember whose quote it was. Someone said, an ecological like education ends up, you walk through a world of cuts or something like this. Really, like everything you see, you then go, you see where there's a problem, and you see where something was done that really impacted nature. And I think in one sense, I'm lucky that I didn't get a position. I went for a position to do a PhD on the Great Barrier Reef, and now I'm really glad I didn't, because I think I wouldn't be able to deal with the depression of watching that system die in front of me. At least in Europe, and like with talking like with other Europeans, like it's at least there's hope underneath it all. And for me, I'm very critical of many aspects of how we have managed our wildlife and our wild spaces in the past, and how we are doing it now. That's much more important to me, like what we are doing now. But it's not criticism from the point of view of that I like to criticize people because I think I'm better than them, or I'm on some kind of high tower or something like this. This criticism and criticism in general it's a form of optimism. It's a form of saying, wow, we can actually do something better. And isn't that so exciting? Like, why not think about it a different way and move towards something that really is exciting and that we can build upon for generations to come. Like that's where the criticism comes from. It's criticism, but it's mixed like fundamentally with optimism.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, like in Europe, seems that things are going in a good direction. At least if you look at the large carnivores, and it's probably one of the more optimistic.
Yeah, it really is. It's like one of the like in effect, it's like one of the only success stories. But that's like that. Like we need to kind of build on that momentum. We need to like bring that forward and use. I would say if I was trying to conserve birds, for example, in forest or in kind of swamps or wetlands or something like this, I would be trying to use like large carnivores like wolves to help establish protected areas that can also protect birds. Because if you think about the home range of a wolf and you think, okay, this is a couple of 100 kilometers squared, if we can protect even one home range of a wolf, like that's huge. That's huge for every smaller animal that uses a smaller amount of space underneath that.
Yeah.
So these things are
they are like vehicles to protect habitat.
Say again?
They're like vehicles to protect habitat.
Yeah, exactly. They're and it doesn't mean excluding people. I'm not saying that it's ever the case. Like national parks, people always say national parks are like this kind of pinnacle of nature protection. They're full of people. They're full of people all the time. Like even in where we live in Bavarian Forest National Park, like it's I think at this stage the biggest forested national park in Germany, and it had more visitors this year, I think, than any other year. And now there's multiple wolf packs, and there's plenty of lynx, and there's red deer and roe deer and wild boar everywhere. So like not at super high densities, but they're there, and they survive and they thrive, and the people around them that at least the people that use the national park and are local have a really good attitude to these animals.
Yeah. Have you been involved in any discussions or any interaction with farmers who were directly affected by the predation?
Only through sort of through translation, so it's not really in effect my questions going over in the way that I want to ask them. It's something I'm trying to get like more involved in, especially in Ukraine, where in the Carpathians, like wolves often take actually they more often take dogs than anything else. But I want to know what the people's kind of perspective on this is. Like in general, their dogs are all outside and they're all roaming around the village, and then dogs go missing because of wolves. But what do people where do people see this kind of coexistence problem happening? Do they think it's more that this is what wolves do and that's fine and that happens and it's just a dog, or do they think like this is my family pet and I'm really affected by this and there should be some kind of solution that either a national park comes up with or the Ministry of Ecology decides to do about the wolves? So I'm still excited to have these conversations with people. But in general, I think in Ukraine and Belarus, there's a lot less. The farming system is, of course, so different.
Yeah.
In Germany, it's also quite a bit different, I would say. But there are people who are more so who are more like farmers, say in Ireland. And then I would love to talk with more Italian farmers as well, because they tend to have a lot of sheep, or Spanish farmers where there's a lot of sheep. Or Greek farmers, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like it's. Go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead.
all of these people have like a different way of dealing with the problem and different attitudes, and I'd love to keep those conversations going.
Yeah. Spain seems to be one of the places where that conflict is. I had even like you might be aware of that. We had a kind of interaction on social media a few months ago with a farmer from Germany who got the horse killed by wolves.
Mm-hmm.
Ah, man, that was like a. It wasn't like I don't think it was like any room for any kind of conversation. It was like and I understand that. Like I just can't imagine. You have your horse, and all it's almost like a family member. Plus, it's a huge value. Mm-hmm. And then one day it's like killed, and it's like, oh, now those rewilders coming asking me a questions, right? So I was like,
Yeah, I mean, so this is obviously, it's heartbreaking for someone, especially if they're really connected with their animal in this sense. And these things, maybe we just don't know how to deal with it yet. But how do we find that way to deal with it? The only way is to talk about it. The only way is to ask. The only way is to say, well, is there certain things that you think were important in this wolf killing your horse or something like this? I'm not really sure exactly. I haven't thought about it enough, but like for a wolf, it's not coming in with like foam dripping out of its mouth going, I need to eat a horse. It just does what it does. It's just an animal. They're smart, and they're
opportunity. It was an opportunity, and they took the opportunity. That's it.
I mean, these individual cases are really hard to comment on. It's like in the grand scheme of things, like if you're worried about horses, like I would put your effort into something like horse racing, where horses die every week on a racetrack. Like this is
true.
This is way more impactful on horses and horse welfare than wolves. But it's the same with also people's dogs. People's dogs kill sheep at hundreds of rates, and even people. Dogs kill people. But this is when people see wolves, they think I'm in danger. And really, the danger relatively is minuscule.
Oh yeah, I had an episode of a podcast. I don't remember a number, when my buddy was cycling through the Sahara Desert to get to some fishing destination. Right, it's kind of like mind blowing. He was cycling through desert to get fishing, and the local people turned him back because he said, like, well, this time of the year, if you're going to be camping on the desert, you will get mauled by dogs. There are like a feral dogs. They're not like a wildlife. They're just stray dogs, the feral dogs.
Yeah,
And
no
every
fear.
year, number of people get killed by those dogs because
Yeah.
they're just taking care of themselves, and
But they have no fear of people. And wolves, fundamentally, the only reason that these wolves in Europe exist is because they were too scared to be near people. Because if they were near people, they would have been killed.
Yeah, that was interesting point, and that is kind of nice segue to the probably last thing I want to discuss with you today, which is we get there. So what I'm heading is Ireland, and how Ireland being an island is different from Europe, where you don't have this natural movement of the animal.
Of course.
One of the arguments against reintroduction, and it's specifically I think where it was like in Colorado when there was a ballot and they decided to reintroduce wolves, and a lot of arguments against reintroduction wolves were coming from people who are actually not against having wolves, but the argument is that you're creating a different profile of an animal that you're reintroducing, because those animals are kind of less aware and less afraid, and they less know what to do because they were just put in this place, and now go ahead and figure things out, versus the animals who are naturally colonize the area, and their profile is different because they know, they figure out what to do to not get in conflict with human too much, and kind of like it. So that I thought that was interesting arguments, like, well, let's not reintroduce them there. Let's let the nature takes its course. Here I'm saying it because in the long run it's gonna be better. And I was thinking about it in the context of like Ireland or Scotland, where at least a pack of German wolves will go full U-boat mode and show up at the shore. Like we have no idea, right? We have not no idea, but we have no chance other than just get them in a crate and ship them over and cut them loose. And that that creates this to me personally absurd situation where you're talking about wildlife crime, right? You because like if you and I like get a wolf in a crate and smuggle them over the channel and cut them loose in Ireland, that's a wildlife crime, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So in that it's like my mind blowing, because like, so that means that in Europe, actually wildlife crime is a crime that committed by wildlife, by the fact of them moving somewhere, right? It's like it's like. So what are your comments? I'm wondering like what's your
it's a funny thing. So for me, I don't know. I feel quite strongly about this problem of putting wildlife to a democratic vote is actually not a good idea. Even though, for instance, like I would say, if you look at like Ireland or Scotland, where you might actually that democratic vote for like a reintroduction would probably cross the line, and especially if you look at like the proportion of people who live in cities and therefore have less stake in like say in agriculture or something like this. But again, it's what we talked about earlier, this like slippery slope. Do you start voting on pine martens? Like pine martens are eating some people's chickens, I'm sure, but we're not going to democratically vote whether we want them or not. They're just fundamentally a part of our ecosystem. That's probably for me like really like an important thing. And I'm sure that actually the Wildlife Service in Colorado were not really happy about this idea of voting as well, because they said they would prefer the introduction to come in a natural way, just by dispersal. But yes, we have no. This is not possible in Ireland or the UK. It's just not possible. So what can we do? There has to be some things that we can do in our kind of understanding and knowledge of how these systems work. And obviously, we don't want animals turning up at people's doors or coming into farms or something like this. like I haven't really thought about it enough to give you like a really good answer, but maybe something like actually having every animal that's reintroduced collared with a GPS tracker, like this way, and a team of people who can in effect sort of manage the introduction in a light sense, at least for the implementation of this kind of project, where you can know where the animals are, and you can know what the risks are, and like wolves are smart, and they don't like people in general, but they're also adaptable, and I hate to say it's like training, but you could nearly scare the wildlife away from certain areas, and then they learn not to go there. Like this is
Yes.
this is done with many different things.
There's a research in the US where they try to do this exact same thing with mountain lions.
Yeah. So it's not,
and they're measuring, what is the reaction of the mountain lion that was scared off by the loud sound, and then that animal tends to avoid the areas when he heard that sound, and
yeah, of course,
like manage conflict that way, which is
so
exactly
it's like Pavlov's dog, except it's a wolf. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, listen, we're gonna be wrapping this thing up. Is there anything you wanna leave our listeners with? Any final thoughts or anything that we should talk about and we didn't?
No, I think probably everyone who listens to your podcast thinks a lot about nature and thinks a lot about our place in nature, and I think to keep talking about that and keep having those conversations with people, especially people who don't really think about it a lot, and you'll find that the world is obviously full of diverse opinions, and like bringing everyone together is always like a good thing, and talking about these things is always a good thing, and most importantly, to say thank you to you for having me on the podcast.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's absolute pleasure, and I feel like we already like hour and a half into it, and I feel like we could do another hour and a half easily. Listen, man, when's your research? When you're gonna conclude your research?
I don't know.
Years away? Is it like you don't even think about it? It's so far away.
So it'll be different stages will be concluded at different times. I think it just depends really on what data comes in and what we decide to analyze at a specific time. Like I will be researching this kind of topic specifically for the next few years, but probably I will now always be invested in it because I have conducted the work and the field work, and the data will come in probably, and I will probably process it for years to come. So like every time I have kind of conclusions or results and papers and stuff, I will Twitterize them like crazy. So
yeah. Okay, I would really welcome you into the podcast again once you have some that we can talk about your results. That's anytime. Listen, man, for everybody who is listening to that and would like to know more or contact you on social media, how to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'm at Adam F. Smith on Twitter. That's the best place to kind of contact me. Or if you're a researcher, you can also find me on ResearchGate and keep up to date with anything that I publish.
Sure. Adam, thanks a lot for your time. I really appreciate it. It was a great conversation, and I'm looking forward to talking to you again sometime.
Yeah, it was super. Thank you so much, Tommy.